Hi, I'm Gary, and this is episode 270 of EV Musings, a podcast about renewables, electric vehicles, and things that are interesting to electric vehicle owners. And on the show today, it's the season 14 mid-season roundtable episode. Big round of applause, yay! This season of the podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence. So, welcome to episode 270 of the podcast. 270. They grow up so quickly, don't they? Moving on, our main topic of discussion today is a mid-season roundtable episode. Now, once again, this season, I'm putting on a mid-season roundtable, similar format to the finale one, the one that we hold at the end of every season, just held at a different point. And just like our usual end-of-season show, I'm going to invite a number of select individuals on. Each one will present a topic of discussion, which they introduce up to the panel for a Q&A, back and forth. And when we've set the world to rights with that topic, we'll move on to another topic. So let's first of all introduce my guests. And my first guest is Laura Huswick-Wilkes. Laura is the operations manager with the fleet roaming operator Power, spelt P-A-U-A. They've actually been on the show before when her boss Neil Riddle joined us for an episode. So welcome, Laura.
Hi, welcome. Thank you.
Laura's a little bit nervous. It's her first podcast, but she's doing fantastic, so don't worry. My second guest is Dr. Euan McTurk, longtime friend of the show, having been on several episodes in earlier seasons. And I believe you've got a record 3 episodes last season when you came on and talked about battery chemistry, battery fires, and ChargeSaint in 3 different slots. So welcome, Doctor.
Nice. Good to be back.
Now, as I said earlier, it's one topic per person as we move around the virtual table. So what I want to do is open the table to Laura. So what is your chosen topic?
My chosen topic is to talk about overstay fees and if CPOs are doing it to create good habits or it's actually more of a cash grab scheme.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, introduce the topic for us then, please.
So I thought I'd just start off with trying to define an overstay fee. That's always the best way to start off from it. So for the sake of the discussion, an overstay fee is a penalty to a driver that could be for when they have finished charging but are still plugged in on a charger, or they've gone over a time set predefined by the CPO. And for this discussion, I wanted to focus predominantly on those that are overstaying a preset time designated by the CPO, as this could mean that your vehicle is more than likely still charging, making use of the infrastructure that is there. A great example of what I wanted to say is that I've got a charger that has a Type 2 7 kilowatt charger that after 90 minutes charges a £50 overstay fee. And £50 is a lot for a 7 kilowatt charger. Obviously, this is a slower Type 2 charger. And as we've seen, these are mainly for destination overstay fee, overnight charging, predominantly ones that people will be there for quite a while. So I don't know why you'd need to have an overstay fee, particularly of this example, where it's £50 after 90 minutes. This charger is actually located at a park and ride as well. So it's definitely one where people will be there. And the assumption is they will be there for a lot longer than the 90 minutes preset by the CPO. So is this a cash grab or is this trying to set some sort of good habit? In my view, I fully understand that a CPO, they need to have high utilization on chargers. But surely if a vehicle is still charging and still making use of that infrastructure, we shouldn't be penalising a driver that is using it when this is technically classed as like confirmed revenue for that CPO. They shouldn't be making that driver leave on the chance or the hope that there is another driver sat there waiting to use that charger. You've also got to think of it from a driver's point of view. They've decided to use this. It's the slower charger. It's not one where you plug in, grab coffee, make use of facilities and then leave again. It's one where you know you're going to be there for a while. If you then penalise that driver, the likelihood is that driver won't ever come back to this charger again. You've lost the chance of having reoccurring revenue and people will tell people about it. I had this bad situation. I had this bad experience happen. And they'll tell those people will tell those people. You've then got a whole group of people, exactly, that don't want to use these chargers because of the overstay fees that they're going to get. So my last point on it is that, before I open it up to everyone to talk about it, is I know that EVs are shifting. We're shifting very quickly from the early adopters to the mass adoption phase. So overstay fees, I understand, are probably going to need to be used to create the habits. But I don't understand how this is fair for drivers. It's not protecting drivers. It's not making people want to use these chargers. So, and I hate to say it, is there a point that we should be regulating overstay fees to protect the driver and to keep it fair for all CPOs so that they can have higher utilization and correct habits, but drivers so they're not penalized for this as well?
The big question is it a cash grab? Oh, yes, absolutely. Moving on. No. I'm sure Euan has a lot of thoughts about this, so I'm happy to open it up to him. But I think at some point I want to come back and expand it a little bit and talk about overstay fees as a general concept rather than just in the fairly narrow band of what you've just mentioned. So, Euan, do you have any thoughts on this?
Certainly do. So when you mentioned a park and ride that has a 90-minute time limit on a 7 kilowatt charge point, that immediately put me in mind of Livingston Designer Outlet, which has a multi-story car park that has one 7 kilowatt type 2 charge point on every level of the multi-story. They used to be absolutely rammed. And then in the infinite wisdom of the owners of that site, they decided to introduce a time limit after 2 hours. And funnily enough, those charge points soon became vacant because nobody wanted to have to pay the overstay penalty. Thankfully, after much nagging and attempts to get through to the relevant people within the designer outlet, they have actually extended the time limit to 4 hours, but there is still an overstay penalty. So City of Edinburgh Council, when they introduced their newer tranche of charging infrastructure, they also introduced overstay penalties. And they were installing 50 kilowatt rapid chargers that were predominantly for the use of Edinburgh's growing fleet of electric taxis, hackney cabs, but they were only giving a 30-minute time limit on a 50 kilowatt charger, and such was the brand of charger that was installed. You might not necessarily be getting the full 50 kilowatts because it's probably semi-defunct. I suspect that half an hour time limit was considered fair by committee, but not everyone in that committee actually owned or drove an EV. And before you know it, the councillors that did own and drove EVs were vehemently campaigning alongside EV driving residents and visitors to the city, saying, we need to be extending that time limit. We like the fact there's an overstay penalty because it keeps the network moving, but it needs to be fairer so that this newer kind of generation of bigger battery EVs can actually take on a meaningful amount of charge. The Type 2 charge points at the park and rides have a time limit of 16 hours, which is entirely fair, I would say. So yeah, that's actually worked out really well.
Yeah.
And what you found in the likes of the Scottish EV Drivers Club Facebook page and so on was paradoxical. It was kind of the polar opposite of what would have been happening in England, I would imagine, because quite a lot of Charge Place Scotland was free to use initially. It was the local authorities and the likes of Livingston Designer Outlet, the owners of that infrastructure that set the tariffs, rather than a central kind of like Instavol or Osprey, and it's like we own the hardware, we set the tariffs. So EV drivers in Scotland were actually begging local authorities to charge them a tariff, because it meant that that means that you're not going to get the freeloaders. You're going to be able to get onto the infrastructure and use it when you need it, and that would be followed up by time limits and overstay penalties that are fair. So in Scotland, we've seen what happens when you don't have time limits and overstay penalties. It gets ugly, it gets infuriating. We need them, but for goodness sake, make sure that you're applying a fair time limit given the location and the type of hardware in question.
Yeah. I think it all boils down to what is the behavior you're trying to promote by putting a time limit in. And if it's a case of the people who were staying on the charges because they were free, if you're encouraging the behavior to say, well, yeah, it's free, but we don't want you to stay on there from 0 to 100% just because it's free, there are other people who need to use that. And I think if you put an appropriate time limit on that and an appropriate overstay fee, that will encourage the right behaviors. But the example that you started with, Laura, which is a 7 kilowatt charger with a 90-minute time limit before the overstay fee, that's not necessarily encouraging the behaviors that we want, because with all the best will in the world, what are you going to get off 90 minutes at a 7 kilowatt, which might get you 40 miles, 44 miles on certain vehicles? And it's interesting because I was reminded of a post I read yesterday, and this is where I kind of want to open it up a little bit. Sarah Sloman, friend of the podcast and known to all of us, posted that she was at a Tesla supercharger, and they've now introduced what they're calling a congestion fee. And it's, for all intents and purposes, it's the same sort of thing. And they're saying that at peak times, if you charge for more than 80% of the battery, you're charged 50 pence a minute as a congestion fee. And they're trying to encourage the behavior, obviously, of getting people off the superchargers when they hit 80%, which is generally when the charge speed starts to slow down, to allow somebody else to come on who's at a lower state of charge and will therefore get a higher charge speed, put more energy through, and earn more money for our good friends at Tesla. So it is definitely a behavioral impact. And I think when people don't consider that, that's when you get the issue of, well, is it actually behavioral or is it a cash grab?
I think also with Tesla, they've actually had that for quite a while, but I don't know if they've been implementing it. So I wrote a blog back in 2024 and used that as an example. So they've definitely had that for a while, but I don't know if they've been implementing it much. There's so much questions towards that as a congestion fee that as a driver, you don't know what you're going to be charged because there's so many questions around it. It could be great, it's all full. And obviously with Tesla, you know if vehicles are going to come up to those charges that they're trying to move you off. It makes sense, but there's too many questions around it to know what you're going to be charged. It's not fair on the drivers that actually will need that 100%. So it could be like, I need X amount of miles to get home, but I need to get my vehicle to 100% or 90% because I just want to put my foot down and get home. I don't want to stop again to charge again somewhere else. It's not fair to then cause a problem for those drivers because of the way they charge.
There is a case to say that it's actually quicker to go to another charger when your state of charge has dropped down to 70 or 60% and charge up than it is to stay at that charger and try and charge up to a higher state of charge at a lower rate. Haven't done the figures myself, but I'm led to believe that that's how it works. Before we move on, Laura, I know with power, I think I'm right in saying that you tend to capture overstay information.
Definitely, yes.
Do you have any stats that you might be able to share with us from that point of view?
Yeah, definitely. So we've done a quick check of the last 6 months of charging across all of our fleets. And we've found that just over 2% of all transactions have got overstay fees associated with them. And with that, they're on average about £10 per overstay fee. So you can see the 2% actually does start to have huge implications towards fleets. We actually found that one fleet, and we were working with them before this, that they found that 20% of their total cost of charging were overstay fees. Well, that is actually it was ICE vehicle drivers that have moved across to electric that didn't have the education to know that there were such thing as overstay fees. So they were just plugged in, they didn't know any different, started to get all these overstay fees. We broke it down and showed the fleet managers, and they were able to then stop those drivers from getting those overstay fees. And now I think they were sat at about 2% at their last check for overstay fees. So they're still getting them, just not as much. So it's thousands upon thousands of pounds that have been spent on overstay fees.
Euan, do you have any information on the most egregious overstay fee that has been charged?
Not in terms of financial terms, no, but I do know that the likes of the Tesla supercharger, you've got, I think, about 10 minutes to move your vehicle once it's completed charging, excluding the congestion fee, or you start getting hit with like £1 a minute. I don't know if there's a cap on that, but the kind of the schadenfreude associated with there being just an infinite limit, and someone who's treating rapid charging infrastructure as long stay parking, they deserve that unless there was some genuine emergency. But if you are just treating that as a special space just for you and you don't care about anyone else, those sort of people are only going to respond when they're hit in their wallet. And that's why we need these overstay fees. I think the worst example we've seen was there was a Ford Transit, e-Transit van that was plugged into the same central London on-street charge point for 5 days straight. And that, they only needed about 5 hours to actually charge their vehicle. And here they were, 5 days later, just hadn't bothered moving it. So the charge point operator in question was a bit skittish about the idea of introducing overstay penalties because they didn't want to be seen as being draconian. They didn't want to, as you mentioned earlier, Laura, punish EV drivers for using their network. But here was an example where other EV drivers were being prevented from using the network. That was a strong case for introducing overstay penalties. And as I say, the Scottish mindset, because of everything we've been through with Charge Place Scotland and the various local authorities, and the kind of misuse and abuse of the network, because there were no overstay penalties initially, most Scottish EV drivers, I suspect, would be very happy to see overstay penalties, provided that they are fairly designed. So yeah, I'm very much in team overstay penalty camp here.
I think the worst thing I ever came across, don't think I'm going to name names, but there was a reasonably large hub partway up the M1. That hub the actual chargers are no longer there at that hub. So it's since been made defunct, but the local council used to charge their vans, their electric vans on there. And I went up, my parents live up north, so I traveled up there, and in the vehicle that I had to stop at that. I only had a 100-mile range, so I stopped it there. I went up 2 days before Christmas. There was a van on there that had already been on 27 hours. I came back the day after New Year, so 7-8 days. That same van was still on there, hadn't moved. And when I spoke to the charge point operator in question, they said, because according to the website, it's a £10 overstay fee per hour. And I thought, right, good. So presumably you've billed the council X £1,000. And the feedback that I got was, yes, but we only apply that for the first 2 hours. So basically he got a £20 overstay fee and he was able to stay on there for about 8 days.
For goodness sake, that's some cheap parking, isn't it? Actually, you do bring up an interesting point, because there are a lot of tradespeople, the likes of your sort of DPD vans and so on, not to single them out. There are large fleets that are going electric. This is great to see. They don't necessarily have the depot charging infrastructure. This is where the likes of peer-to-peer depot infrastructure sharing is brilliant. I'm going to single out First Group for this, because they are a massive electric bus depot in Glasgow. They've opened this up to other electric fleets and, to an extent, members of the public as well, because the buses are obviously out during the day, and it's only during the wee hours of the night that they're actually back charging. So you've got this incredible asset sitting there that your taxis and your delivery vans can use.
What you conveniently forgot about with the First Bus depot in Glasgow is 39 pence a kilowatt hour for public rapid charging at that site.
How could this Scotsman forget such a bargain?
Laura, do you have anything to say to bring this topic to a close?
I'd probably say that I have obviously seen quite a few different overstay fees that are implemented. I think my highest one, fortunately, was for a fleet of about £500. They got an overstay fee because they lost the car keys to the vehicle. So, and they couldn't then move the vehicle. So there was all sorts that went on with that one. So it's under that weird situation where actually they didn't really want to be there and they had no choice until they could find those keys. But for me, I have to agree. I think overstay fees are needed for chargers, but they need to be fair for all. They need to be fair so the CPO isn't losing out, but drivers aren't being penalised for it. The opportunity to have clear signage, clear rules that stipulate this is what will happen, this is what you will get. And to know that actually, yes, let's say for the Type 2 one, yes, you can have the 16 hours on charge for free. And after that, that is when you'll start to be charged an overstay fee. It needs to make this crazy thing called common sense. And if they had common sense and applied it to the overstay fees, then I am 100% all for it, because that's what creates the good habits. Fortunately, if CPOs are trying to then cash grab, you're going to see people not want to charge on the public network because of that reasoning. As my mother used to say, the problem with common sense is it's not actually that common. Very smart woman. Thank you, Laura. Excellent topic. Euan, what would you like to talk about?
So quite a lot of you will know me through my battery electrochemistry consultancy and Plug Life Television and so on, but I do have my side mission, which is Charge Saint, which is an app that allows EV drivers to report blocked and broken charging infrastructure directly to someone who can do something about it, whether it's the charge point operator, car park operator, or the local authority. So over the last 18 months or so that the app has been live, we've done some real-world trials with charging networks. We've had hundreds of reports in from across the UK with excellent detail as to the nature of kind of bay blockages, and it's not always the kind of standard stuff you would think of. And really, until now, we've not had a good idea of just how big a problem icing and bay blocking in general actually is. So I suppose, based on the learnings we've had so far, now that we've actually got eyes on the ground in the form of EV drivers who can report this to someone who can do something about it, my question is, how big an issue is icing and bay blocking, and what more can be done to solve this if it is an issue?
Now, that's interesting, because I'm going to talk a little bit about a related topic later on, which is to do with charge site placement, because I think a lot of what you're talking about is directly related to where the actual chargers have been put. Laura, any thoughts?
Definitely on that. I think there's different types of versions of charger blocking, and one that I've recently come across was EVs that are parked in the EV charging bay and pretending to charge on the chargers. So they've even to the point where they've got the Type 2 cable out, they've plugged it in, but you can see that the end that's supposed to go into the vehicle is just sat there. It's not actually in the charger. So not only are they completely blocking the bay, but they're making it seem like that they've done it on purpose. It's not one that have just gone, oh, I didn't know it was a charging bay, and they've gone and done that. Another example that I've had, and it was so recent I put on LinkedIn, was disable bays that have got EV charging on and the signage wasn't clear. So there were petrol and diesel vehicles parked in these EV charging bays, and I got angry at them. Personally, I never went and spoke to them. I'm not that brave. But from a distance was like, why are they here? Like, you can't be doing this. These are for chargers. And it wasn't until they left that I noticed underneath where their cars are parked, there was a disabled bay icon. And I'm going, oh, can people park there that have got ICE vehicles? But now you're blocking a charger. And I then realized, I looked underneath my own car, that I was parked in one of those bays. So was I in the wrong? As an EV driver, I was charging my vehicle on a charger, but it was a disabled bay. So am I now blocking that charger for someone else that needs it? And I went round in a whole situation in my head, and I had no clue who was in the wrong and who was in the right. And so I didn't know if anyone was blocking chargers over that. But I think it is a huge problem. We've got other ones that have happened where I've come across lorries in service stations on, your grid serves your Tesla sites when you're on the motorways, where it's later at night and there's no vehicle parking for their HGVs because they're full. So they're parking in the public car park area. But because of where the chargers are, the trucks and the lorries are parked over the charging bays. So then I couldn't go charge the vehicles, and they couldn't move their vehicles because they were on their wind down time. So they're not allowed to move those vehicles. And we were stuck in this whole stalemate. And I'm like, I don't really want to be walking around trucks either at this, like, late at night by myself. But I think it's a huge problem, and I don't know how to fix it without, again, penalising drivers that are doing it. I think it's a huge problem, and fully agree.
Right, so Euan, couple of things then. From a charge sane point of view, if somebody reports exactly what Laura said there, there's a diesel van, it's parked in a disabled bay, which is actually also a charging bay. How is that dealt with?
So that does depend on the nuances of the traffic regulation order, the TRO, or the equivalent for private land. So TRO is typically something you'd find in public, council-owned car parks or on street. If there's signage that says EV charging only, then there's a piece of legislation that says a traffic warden can come along and slap a parking fine on your windscreen if you're misusing that bay. So have they defined that bay as dual purpose, blue badge holder, or EV driver? Doesn't matter if the EV driver is able-bodied or not, or the EV driver must also be a blue badge holder. There's these nuances which, if we were in North America, there would be probably a totem pole of signage that would explain this. But we are a bit more kind of reserved in the UK, and we make it just a bit more kind of concise, and then direct you. Well, I say direct you. They don't tell you, go onto the council website and we explain it in detail, but that's what you would end up doing, and it'd be buried in a page somewhere within various subdirectories of the council website. But in terms of what we would do, if that local authority is signed up to our services, or if that charging network is signed up to our services, we would automatically have matched the location, the charger ID. We would know it was theirs, so we would forward that report onto them. And, your traffic wardens could be dispatched in real time to investigate if the rules were such that, this bay is purely for electric vehicles, whether the driver is a blue badge holder or not, but it's designed so that EV drivers who have blue badges can access it more easily. They can decide that. I suppose on the flip side of the coin, if there is no blue badge in the EV and it's actually a bay that is exclusively for blue badge EV drivers, then the traffic warden could be dispatched as well. And depending on the legislation where you are in the country, potentially the PCN, the penalty charge notice, could be dispatched via the post without the parking manager or traffic wardens having to leave the office. So that's what we would do. But it does come down to the differences in these traffic regulation orders and the rules between public land and private land. So, when it comes to the enforcement side, it does depend on that exact site. But nonetheless, even if no enforcement comes of it, this is invaluable evidence because it shows that there is confusion and it shows that something needs to be done to clarify the matter. Basically, that evidence, although we cannot see any kind of instant digital justice, PCN sent through the post and stuff, we can build up that groundswell of evidence that EV drivers are trying to use this charge point, but can't. It might not be an overnight fix, but it builds up the evidence that will eventually mean that bays will be accessible when you need them.
Right. I want to come back and ask you a little bit about some data, because I know you've got some nice statistics there. But before I do that, tell me about the guy who thought he had his own personal public charging space.
Yeah. Someone got very protective over their incredibly public on-street lamppost charge point, and they literally chained and padlocked their Type 2 cable to it so that even if the charge point operator went, you know what, now this is ridiculous, we're terminating this charge session, so it would unlock the charge point, you physically couldn't remove it. That is the most ludicrous, petty example of self-entitlement that I have seen from any EV driver ever. And this is the sort of evidence that, again, ANPR cameras and stuff, bay protection cameras probably wouldn't pick up very easily. Ground-mounted sensors certainly wouldn't. Traffic wardens would, they would eventually when they're going past on the beat, but it's just that, again, EV drivers are constant eyes on the ground. We've got that omnipresence that no other solution has. And these reports, genuinely thank you to every single EV driver who's reported issues, no matter what they are, via ChargeSync, because they're building up a picture of not just your vanilla, this is a petrol car parked in an EV charging bay. It's building up a surprisingly complex picture of some of the issues that we're going to need to overcome and nip in the bud going forwards, because I bet you there's nothing in any TRO out there or any terms and conditions from a charging network saying thou shalt not padlock and chain their Type 2 cable to our charge point.
Yeah. Now, linking what you've just said with what Laura mentioned earlier on, because she talked about people parking up with an electric vehicle, plug it in, or pretending to plug in and actually using it as a parking space. Now, intuitively, when I hear you talk about this, my mind immediately goes to, it's the big blocker. The people who cause most of this are internal combustion engine people. They're parking there, they're not charging, they can't charge, and sometimes they're doing it out of ignorance, sometimes they're doing it out of spite. But I know you've got some data to sort of qualify exactly what the major causes are of bay blocking. So can you share that with us, please?
I certainly can. So if there's no TRO in place, what we've found is that 3/4 of the bay blocking incidents are straight up icing, and then 26% are EVs betraying their brethren. But if you put a TRO in place, that suddenly becomes a 50-50 split. Well, it's actually 52% icing, 48% bay hogging by EVs. So it's slightly Brexity figures, actually, if you look at the proportional split. But if we then look at the absolute figures, with no TRO in place, versus having a TRO in place. Although you've reduced icing substantially, there is in absolute terms an actual increase in the number of EVs that are seeing signage saying EV charging only. They somehow miss the bit that says charging and go, that's a special space just for me. So more EVs misuse charging bays from what we've seen so far, that actually say EV charging only. Whether that is, parking but not plugging in, or parking and charging but leaving the cable plugged in for days on end, or exactly what you said, Laura, the kind of, I think it's called ghost charging, isn't it, where you pretend to plug in. And in fact, one of our earliest reports we received from a ChargeSync user was exactly that. So to the naked eye, that vehicle was charging. To a traffic warden, that vehicle was charging, because not only was the cable plugged into the charge point, but unlike what you said about, it's sitting loose or something, it was properly plugged into the EV as well. But there had been no attempt to activate the charging session. And they proved this by taking a photograph of the cable, the plug in the charge point, and then the second photograph, they'd managed to take the cable out of the charge point. The Type 2 charge protocol is that if a charging session has been activated, the cable shall be locked in place until the EV driver returns and stops the charging session and unlocks their vehicle. So we know for a fact that there was no attempt to start that charging session. And we also pull live data from the back office of the charge point operator if they're a customer of ours. So, yeah, we have all that evidence to say you never even attempted to charge. That then gets sent to the charge point operator and ideally the local authority as well. The local authority can then dispatch a traffic warden who can, with great confidence, check the cable again and go, right, okay, there's your parking fine.
Yeah. Laura, did those figures shock, astound you, or is it kind of that's pretty much what I thought?
I'd say that's pretty much what I've thought. I've only been driving EVs for about 2 years. But I've seen my fair share of every explanation you get, except for padlocking your Type 2 charger to it, which I appreciate the mentality of that going, I want this charger. I can fully understand it from that point of view, but I've seen so many different versions of charger blocking from both sides. And even that where people have tried to start a charge, or they've just plugged in the ghost charging, as you said, because you can see the colours on some of the chargers. And people that don't know, so, family friends that I've had with me, and I've gone, that car's not charging. They're like, what do you mean? It's plugged in. I'm like, it's not even started. It's still this colour. It means it's not charging. They're blocking this bay for someone. So for me, that doesn't surprise me at all. It makes me sad as someone in the EV industry that are seeing other EVs doing this, because you're giving everyone a bad name. You're giving the industry, the vehicles, that bad name, which we just don't want. We've been fighting for so long to remove, all the FUD from it, and then just to have people do that, you're like, come on. But on the flip side, it's not up to them to do that. It's not up to them to tell people EVs are great. They're just getting on with their day. They're selfish and they don't care as much as we do, unfortunately. So it sadly doesn't surprise me. I wish it wasn't like that, though. I really do.
Yeah. And I think, as with all the things that I tend to discuss on this podcast, a lot of it comes down to education. Because, yes, you're always going to have the selfish people who are gaming the system. But you're also going to have the people who genuinely think, oh, well, this is an EV space. I've got an EV. I'm going to park here. I don't need to charge, but it's for parking, isn't it? And I think there's an education aspect to say, no, there is no such thing as EV parking. There's EV charging or there's parking. And the two are completely different things. And I think if you get to the situation where somebody has had 1, 2, 3 visits from the traffic warden as a result of somebody reporting them on Charge Saint, I think that education starts to become a little more, a little easier to pass over, doesn't it? Cool.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, we've seen that, to be honest, it's been an education piece for charge point operators and local authorities as much as for EV drivers. But, as you say, Laura, there are some people who don't realise it. They see the kind of EV only. They somehow miss the charging. And if you're an EV newbie, you'd be amazed how many EV newbies just think, okay, this must be for parking rather than plugging in. You can just sit here as well. And then, someone will kindly tap them on the shoulder and say, by the way, that's for charging. If you need to park, just go and park in a regular bay. They're like, most of the time, they seem to be quite apologetic. There'll be innocent mistakes. And to be honest, EV dealers need to, do the education piece. And quite frankly, not enough of them are. Obviously, we've got brilliant associations such as EVA England, who are very good at embracing new people to EVs and providing the kind of training and etiquette and that kind of hive mind, which just brings everyone up to scratch on the quirks of driving electric really quickly. But there'll be many people to whom they are completely unaware of all this and they're just kind of going it alone. And that's where we need to make sure that it's as obvious as possible that you should not be doing this. And if that does involve giving you a sting of a PCN parking fine, you do that once and you very quickly learn not to do that again.
Yeah. Totally agree. Time is creeping, so I want to move on if you don't mind, Euan. Thanks for that topic. Excellent one. I want to bring up a topic that kind of piggybacks onto the two things that we've already discussed here. So let me say charge point site selection. Now, let me explain. A lot of what we've been talking about today can be boiled down in most instances to poor site selection and placement of chargers. And a prime example, as we've already talked about, is icing. If you put chargers in a car park near the main entrance to the shop, that's where people are going to park if there's a free space. So they'll ice chargers that are there. You yourself, Laura, said that when the power went out in your house this week, you got in your Zoe, you headed to motor services at Scotch Corner. And one of the reasons you chose to hook onto the medium power chargers there rather than the ultra rapids was that they were closer to the entrance. The rapid chargers are back at the far end of the car park. I did the measurements. It's 24 meters versus 100 meters. And those medium power chargers are, I also noticed, right outside the Travelodge Hotel entrance. So I can imagine that they would also get iced quite a lot by people parking there for the hotel. Now, on the subject of hotels, we had Andreas Atkins from Ionity on here recently talking about the Ionity deal with Village Hotels to put ultra-rapid hubs in at hotel sites. Now, these will, by definition, take up parking spaces at a site which traditionally needs overnight parking, not ultra-rapid parking. Although Andreas did give a good explanation on the logic behind this, and I'm not contesting that. If you want to hear what he said, I'll put a link to that particular episode in the show notes. Dwell time is also an issue. And again, we've touched a little bit on that when you were talking about the 7 kilowatt charger with a 90-minute overstay fee on that. If I'm stopping for a meal at your restaurant, do I want a charger which will fill my car in only 40 minutes, meaning I've got to get out and move it in the middle of the meal? Or do I want a slower charger that will allow me to spend a couple of hours plugged in while I eat and not have to worry about whether I'm blocking a charger or not? So, given what we've already talked about today, what are the panel's thoughts on dwell time and the impact that has on charger site selection? Who wants to take the lead on this?
Yeah, you raise the point about Ionity going in at at village hotels with large ultra rapid charging hubs. To be fair, and I apologise if I'm basically repeating what Andreas had said, I've seen some Tesla hubs at hotels. For example, Eurocentral in Glasgow, the Dakota Hotel there's a very successful Tesla charging hub because that hub is at the back of the car park, so it's not. Well, it's very rarely iced and it's kind of out of the way of where hotel guests are going. But also, those EV drivers are going to want to pop in for not just a whiz and a sandwich, but a whiz and a nice scone and cup of tea because it's a very nice hotel. So actually, it works out really well. I mean, that hub was designed from the days of the supposedly kind of well-to-do Model S drivers and things like that of the kind of mid-2010s. It was one of the first in Scotland, if I remember rightly. So that works really well. Likewise, village hotels, I seem to remember from our from our raucous days at Fully Charged Live Farnborough, Everything Electric Farnborough now, the Village Hotel would always be rammed and it would be, great fun. There'd be good food and drink and stuff. Like, don't drink and drive. But, obviously if they're putting in Ionity chargers there, that makes sense because you've got refreshments, you've got, you've got food, you've got somewhere quite nice to be whilst you're charging your car for 20 minutes. So that totally makes sense. What doesn't make sense is what I've seen with, is it Premier Inn, who's teamed up with Genie Point? Yeah, it is, who've teamed up with Genie Point, who are putting in solitary 50 kilowatt rapid chargers. Nobody who's passing by is going to go to those. They're going to go to the Village Hotel and use Ionity because they're faster. And most cars these days are capable of charging at over 100 kilowatts rather than 50, which is hashtag so 2015. So what you've got is the actual hotel guests, basically every random group of new arrivals every night having to, form a WhatsApp group to decide which 30-minute slot they're going to get to rotate and charge their cars. That's awful. So that's my rant on rapid chargers at hotels.
Laura?
For me, I want to say, I preface the fact that I chose the charger that I did was because I was actually going to be there for a while, because I didn't know when my electrics was coming back online. I know the Zoe it can do rapid charging, but it isn't that fast. So it makes no sense for me to have gone to those higher power chargers. I might as well go to the medium power charger that was there. It just so happens it is in front of the doors and I could walk straight in. But I've seen that a lot of times at Scotch Corner where there are ICE vehicles in front of it or there are EVs that are just parked in them and not charging. But for me, it's the right chargers in the right places. That is what it has to come down to. A really good example of that is Mark and Vale services. I absolutely love those services. Every time I go to Birmingham for NEC, any place like that, myself, I always pick Pam up, we drive down and we always stop there and we stop for food. But they have got the Instavolt ultra rapid chargers, they've got EV Point rapid chargers, but they've got Osprey at the 50 kilowatt chargers that are there as well. Without fail, I guarantee I will go to the Osprey chargers, not to the ultra rapids, because we stop for food. For that exact reason, I don't want to be blocking a charger because I know we're going to be there for an hour and a half plus because we talk too much together. So we will sit there and talk, and I know the car will be full when I get there. But it's finding the right chargers for those right locations. The Genie Point chargers that are in hotels will also have overstay fees on them. I know that because we've got fleet drivers that have gone to those hotels to stay overnight and they've plugged in, not read, all that signage that is always there on all of it. And somewhere in very, very small print, it will tell them that I think with Genie Point, it's 90 minutes and then it's £10 per hour that you are plugged in. So if you are there overnight, let's say, and you don't know that they've got overstay fees, you've plugged into that cable, you've gone to bed, gone to sleep, and you've woken up with nearly £100 fine, but you didn't know that there was overstay fees there. Like, that is the wrong type of charger to have there. The flip side, I think Ionicity in village hotels is probably a good idea because they also do a lot of conferences there. I've been to quite a few conferences in village hotels, and I've seen Ionicity building them there and gone, hang on a second, that makes perfect sense, because then I can plug in, do that, and get going again once the conference is finished, or on the lunch break that you have sometimes, you can plug in during that time frame. So it's a lot of education that we've already talked about, but it's finding the right chargers. And I wholeheartedly, unfortunately, don't agree with having chargers at the back of a car park either. Being usually myself just driving, a lone female, I drive at any time of night as well. I don't like walking across car parks from the middle of nowhere where, there's everything at the back of the car park to have to walk to the front of it. I really don't want to be doing that. I want to be able to park as close to possible to the front where there's more light, there's more people, and I feel safer. I don't want to have to then start removing my safety to charge my vehicle further away so other people are happy about it. I'm selfish in that way.
No, that's a really good point. And if I may jump in, sorry, Gary, I saw you were so excited about that. But yeah, I mean, you've raised a brilliant point about personal safety as well as accessibility and electrical safety and so on. And it's worth pointing out at this point the trailblazing work of ChargeSafe on this, because that was one of the no-brainer things is don't make it a dimly lit corner of the car park. But of course, ChargeSafe, which has just been acquired by Safer Charging, so it's now wrapping in electrical safety and kind of high-quality standards of installation there as well. But yeah, it makes so much sense for charge point operators, local authorities, whoever's installing charging infrastructure, when it comes to site selection, hardware selection, the design of the site as well, engage the experts, Safer Charging and ChargeSafe, because it's pocket money to get that high quality consultancy to get it right versus hemorrhaging money by having a lack of utilization because everyone's going next door because their hub's vastly superior to yours, and then you have to rip it out and start again. And another quick thing to chuck in as well is we need to be not just looking at the kind of location of the charge points in isolation. We need to be engaging any separate car park operators, because I was recently driving down to Cenex Expo from Edinburgh. So I stopped at Stafford, where Eon has a shiny new charging hub in the city centre, and they are blisteringly quick chargers. It's the fastest my Ioniq 5's ever charged, so nice one, Eon. However, when I got out of the car, I looked at the signage and it said, if you leave this site on foot, you will instantly receive a fine because of the ANPR that's around the site. This retail park, I looked around, I was like, okay, what is there? What is there that's going to keep me entertained for 20 minutes? There's a majestic wine warehouse and a gym. So I've got nowhere to have a whiz and a sandwich, which meant I had to stop on the motorway services on the way down from Stafford to Milton Keynes anyway. We need to be bringing car park operators, independent car park operators, into the fold and saying, this is charging. People need to go and grab a whiz and a sandwich. It's rapid charging. Do not penalise them for leaving the site on foot if that site does not have the conveniences that are required.
And that's fantastic, because that brings in a whole load of different aspects, because as you've said there, you've got that offset between, and we take Scotch Corner, for example, it's 100 metres from the high-powered chargers back to the main site there, and they are way at the back of the car park. There's literally nothing behind them after that. So you're going to have to walk through somewhere that's potentially quite dark, potentially quite scary, past a hotel, which, you never know who's looking out the windows and watching you as you go past, all that sort of stuff. But you've then got the flip side to that is, we all want some nice rapid chargers at a location. So if they're not putting them there, where are they putting them? So they may end up bringing them a lot closer to the main building. So there may be additional groundworks involved, which will then increase the price to the CPO, which will then have a knock-on effect on the price that we pay for the charging. So at some point, there's going to be an offset from the one to the other there. And the whole area of, and you touched on it, Euan, site selection. So where in the country are we going to put a charger? But once we've got that site, where on that site is the optimal place to put a charger, a bank of chargers, bearing in mind groundwork costs, electricity supply, safety, accessibility, facilities. Like you say, that site in Stafford, fantastic having high-power chargers there, but if you've literally got to stay there for 25, 30, 40 minutes while your vehicle charges and you cannot leave, that's not a particularly well-designed and well-thought-out site, is it? Laura, any thoughts on this before we move on?
No, I'm quite happy with that one. I think, I always look for what you said, a whiz and a coffee, usually for me, is have they got Starbucks and have they got toilets? Usually the Starbucks answers that one. I usually end up at MFG sites because they're in petrol forecourts, but they've usually got food and facilities, and they've got really good facilities on site quite close by to the chargers, and it's all lit up because it's petrol forecourts already. So they've already got all the facilities in place, and they've put the chargers in the right places. So for me, I normally try and tend towards those types of CPOs where I know that I can go get stuff that I need to do as well. So it's encompassing all, but I think it's true. But people are still learning. It is the best thing to put here. People are learning. They've put the chargers in and they've gone, all right, let's see how they go. Years ago, let's talk. And they're still learning now. What is that? What do EV drivers need? You've got Instavolt with their sites that they've put in the Winchester Super Hub, Banbury as well as big sites that they've learned, okay, drivers need toilets, they need coffee, they need food, they need this, they need that. Shopping facilities, not just to look around some wine, which I wouldn't mind doing, but you need something there for people to do as well. It's not just charging, it's not boring charging, it's making all charging destination charging, basically. It needs to have something there for people.
Wonderful. Ironically, or not ironically, as soon as we finish recording this, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to drive up to my mum's and I'm going to stop at Markham Vale.
Enjoy.
It's time for a cool EV or renewable thing to share with you listeners. So do either of my guests have anything interesting to share? Laura?
I was going to let Euan go first with this one. I think he's got a good idea.
Euan, what have you got for us?
So, an exciting development in the world of battery electrochemistry, looking at the circular economy. So, one of the big movements that we've seen throughout the 20s is that electric vehicles have been moving towards lithium iron phosphate batteries, which don't contain nickel, don't contain cobalt. Means they're very ethical, means they're very cheap. It also means they're more difficult to recycle economically because of the low value of the materials. So there's a risk that it will end up with stockpiles of LFP batteries. Well, the UK is now one of the world leaders on lithium iron phosphate recycling. So the ReLib project, which is at Birmingham and Leicester universities, they have some world-class electrochemists who've managed to recycle some heavily damaged, over-discharged lithium iron phosphate batteries and economically recover and restore and reuse those materials for the first time. And incidentally, the supply of those lithium iron phosphate cells came from my vintage electromobile, my old Peugeot 106 Electric, which unfortunately, having been upgraded to lithium iron phosphate in the early 2010s, ended up parked on a very steep driveway on the west coast of Scotland, which gets very rainy. And the bolt-on battery management system for lithium ion, the cover had come loose on that. Water got underneath the bonnet, fried the battery management system, which force discharged the cells. So they were in a right state when they were delivered to the ReLib project. They have managed to economically and impressively recover and restore just about the most messed up lithium iron phosphate material you could imagine. So anything coming out of a well-designed, well-managed electric vehicle, mass-produced, your Tesla Model 3s, MG4s and so on, you're looking at being able to recycle them economically even easier.
My cool EV or renewable thing, solar power is now Hungary's second largest source of electricity, having overtaken natural gas as a power source. Nuclear energy is Hungary's largest source, accounting for more than 40%. Solar overtook gas in 2024 to become the second largest source at about 25%. And coal share has fallen from about 30% in 1990 to 6% in 2024. And this shows renewables are rising while fossil fuel use falls, which is fantastic. The EV Musings podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence. See what charge points are available right now with live availability and unrivaled UK charge point coverage at your fingertips. Pay at thousands of charge points within the app or with the ZapMap charging card. Join over 1 million EV drivers, download ZapMap and charge with confidence. I hope you enjoyed listening to today's show. It was put together this week with the help of Laura Huswick-Wilkes and Dr. Euan McTurk. Many thanks for your help. Thank you. In 10 weeks' time, we'll be doing the end of season roundtable, and I think I've lined up an even more stellar cast of panelists than this one, if that were even possible. More details later in the season, but let's just say it'll be some of the EV's heaviest hitters on the charging, user, and industry sides. So stay tuned for that. If you have any thoughts, comments, or criticisms, or other general messages to pass on to me, I can be reached at info@evmusings.com. On the socials, I'm on Blue Sky, at evmusings.bsky.social. I'm also on Instagram at evmusings, where I post short videos and podcast extracts regularly. Why not follow me there? Thanks to everyone who supports me through Patreon on a monthly basis and through coffee.com on an ad hoc one. If you enjoyed this episode, why not buy me a coffee? Go to coffee.com/evmusings, and you can do just that. And it takes Apple Pay too. Regular listeners will know about my 2 ebooks. So you've gone electric, and so you've gone renewable. 99p each or equivalent, and you can get them on Amazon. Check out the links in the show notes for more information, as well as a link to my EV Musings newsletter and associated articles. Now, I know you're probably driving or walking or jogging or just getting out of the shower, as I learned from one listener the other day. But if you can remember and you enjoy this episode, drop a review in iTunes, or if you're watching it on the YouTube, a little like and subscribe would be fantastic. And if you've reached this part of the podcast and are still listening, thank you. Why not let me know you've got to this point by tweeting me at MusingsEV with the words, halfway home. Hashtag if you know you know. Nothing else. And thanks as always to my co-founder Simon. You know, he's been very quiet this week. That's how it is. Thanks for listening. Bye.